I want to say salute, everybody. And no, this isn't a glass of wine. And no, this isn't our olio nuovo, which would be the newly pressed olive oil, because we will start picking our olives from our 100 trees probably next week. In Umbria, in the hills, you start to pick dopo i morti, after the dead. That means after All Souls Day, November 2nd. They've picked extensively in the valley area. We'll start in the hills next week. We're still waiting for olives to mature a bit more. And we'll be talking tonight about, let me just go back to this, Umbria's liquid gold, the olive oil. And this is the second part about celebrating our olive oil. And tonight we're going to talk quite literally how we celebrate it and how we taste it after the pressing. And in these 6 pictures here, you'll notice in the upper left, our son Keegan, he's picking up some of the branches after we've pruned. I'm sure you all recognize the Basilica of San Francesco with the olive tree symbol of peace in front of the basilica. On the right is that golden crown of olives, which appeared in my lecture last week when we talked about how the emperors, how the athletes of the Olympic Games were crowned with olives. The 2 photos left and right bottom are the olive tree in art. Lorenzetti on the left, Botticelli on the right. And what is in the middle is exactly the topic of our conversation tonight, enjoying olive oil. I'd like to start with showing you this image, which just came in to me today, sent by a friend from Rome, of the oldest olive tree known in Italy. It is in the region of Puglia. It is at least 3,000 years old. And I wanted to show you this because I think this is an exquisite, exquisite sculpture of Mother Nature. Isn't it something? And this is the oldest olive tree that we know of in Umbria. It is one olive tree. It grows up of one set of roots, and documents date it to probably 1,800 years roughly. It's growing out in the hillside near the medieval town of Trevi. It's called the Olivo di Sant'Emiliano. The legend says that Emiliano, who was first bishop of Trevi, 4th century AD, he was martyred. It was 304 AD he was martyred. Legend said he was martyred by being shot with arrows against an olive tree. And according to legend, this is the olive tree of Sant'Emiliano. And I went to see it some years ago. This is not a great photo, but I was really looking in awe at this olive tree. The oldest olive tree in Umbria, again, about 1,800 years old. Olives, of course, define the landscape of Umbria. Up on the hill there, you see the city of Assisi, olive trees in the valley below. These olives below have all been picked now. Up in the hills, people will start picking this week and next week. In the town of Spello, which is about 7 kilometers from Assisi, it's another medieval hill town, Roman origin, as is Assisi, Roman origin, 300 BC roughly. Before the Romans lived that native Italic people called the Umbri. Spello is called La Città dell'Olio, and befittingly, on its medieval bell tower, there are 3 olive trees. They're centuries old. They were probably seeded by pigeons or birds of some sort, but it's quite wonderful. As you arrive in the city of olive oil, you're greeted with olive trees sprouting out of the bell tower. And there's even an ancient olive tree, which is in the roundabout as you enter Spello. Roundabouts are required by European law now. It's a way to save gas. The stoplights are taken out. So when you move into an intersection, you just go in if there's no traffic. And in many of the roundabouts of Umbria, they move in olive trees because the olive trees have short roots and they're easy to be moved actually into place. The city of Spello celebrates olives in its festa of late November, celebrating the new olive oil, and it is called the Festa dell'Olio e della Bruschetta, of olive oil and bruschetta. And there's 3 different terzieri, or sections of the town of Spello, and they compete with floats. On the floats driven by tractors, there'll be olive trees. Hanging from the olive tree branches will be oranges or persimmons, sometimes breads, salamis, capocollo, sausages, and they go through the streets of Spello. Sometimes the floats are on farm carts, and they're accompanied by these young people here. They're dressed like farmers of maybe 100 years ago. Behind them, and you can't see them too well in the photo, are men singing and playing accordions. And you can see that olive tree is hung with oranges, with the round cookies called the ciambellini. There's even bottles of wine under the olive tree. Some of the floats, or the carri, as we call them, are pulled by donkeys. And these gentlemen are dressed as the farmers of 100 years ago. Others are pulled by oxen. These huge white oxen are of the Chianina breed. And here's another gentleman participating in this Festa dell'Olio and della Bruschetta with two of his oxen. This is another tree, another one of the floats, if you will, coming through the town. Olive tree on it, hanging off the branches are oranges, there's sausages, there's salami, and behind them are people with baskets of olives and people with accordions as well, and they'll be singing through the streets of Spello. Here's a group of the singers. They're singing cantarecchia, which means to sing by ear. These are songs in Umbrian dialect. One group will sing a verse, another group will answer. They're delightful songs. They're part of the rural tradition. We want them to be preserved. Not many young people today knew the cantarecchia. That's the song of grandfathers, great-grandfathers. These gentlemen here are singing the cantarecchia, the singing by ear, in one of the back streets of Spello. And on the table in front of them, you can see the pitcher of wine. And there were also laid out there bruschetta with the newly pressed olive oil for the enjoyment of anybody who wanted to taste. And then there's even a table in the main square with all different bottles of the new olive oil, bruschettas to taste, and you can go up and taste them all. And I believe there's a contest and they judge which olive oil was considered by most people to be the best of the year. Look at the color of that olive oil. And the olive oil just pressed is very murky. It's a very deep green. As weeks and months go by, it becomes more limpid. But the newest olive oils are very, very murky. And this person is going to be offered some of the new olive oil. Look at that. A beautiful green liquid on bruschetta. This is the liquid gold of Umbria. Children also participate in this festival, and this is a group of children singing together. They're singing praises to olive oil. They're singing also in Umbrian dialect, and before the festival, they've had classes in the elementary school about olive cultivation, the history of the olive for the Romans, before the Romans. Much of the material we learned last week in my talk is presented to them, and they have a whole period dedicated to the sacred golden liquid of Umbria, the liquid gold, the olive oil. Okay, now we can, whoops, there. And they'll also be singing as well as dancing. These people are dancing the saltarello, which is an Umbrian folk dance, and they're dancing right in front of the entry to Spello, which is Roman, the Porta Consolare. And over that gate, you can see the arch behind this gentleman here on the right. In white limestone, there's togaed figures up there. Those figures in toga, they're Roman sculptures found near the ruins of the Spello amphitheater, and they probably date to the 1st to 2nd century AD. This is the Porta Consolare, in which they were dancing in front of this gate, and you can see the 3 togaed figures over the arch, and there are the olive trees surmounting the medieval bell tower of Spello. And do notice that Spello, like Assisi, is built in the pink and white limestone of the area, very rich in iron, hence the pink color. Some of you may know about the extraordinary Infiorate festival of Spello. For the Feast of Corpus Christi, they lay out 80 flower petals carpets in the streets to welcome Christ, the host, carried over the flowers by the bishop. This is for the Feast of Corpus Christi every year, 60 days after Easter. And I wanted to point this out to show you how sacred is the olive to Spello. In this infiorata, this image here, this is all flowers. The yellow is the broom. And we have in the foreground here, olive leaves, the beloved olive of the city of olive oil, Spello, La Città dell'Olio it's called. We have a very special festival dedicated to olive oil, also in Assisi. We were unable to have the Unto Festival this year because of COVID regulations. These photos are taken from a couple years ago. This festival is called Unto, and this is an acronym for UNESCO, Natura, Territorio, Olio. UNESCO, because a city is a World Heritage Site. Natura, celebrating the nature, the natural resources of a city. Territorio, celebrating the territory around Assisi where the olives are grown. And of course, it's olive oil. Do you know that the word unto, it's a play on words. It means oiled in Italian. The word for to oil is ungere. If you're unto, you've been anointed. You've been oiled. You've had oil put on you. Our word unction comes from it as an extreme unction. It's the last oiling, that is with the sacred oil put with a cross over your forehead by the priest for people who are near death. So when the Unto celebration takes place, for most of the month of November, there are events going on, including visits to farms below the town of Assisi where they're harvesting the olives, as you can see here. And you can see that some of the nets are laid on the ground here for the olive gathering in the valley below the city of Assisi. Look up there on the left. Those of you familiar with Assisi will recognize that as the Basilica of San Francesco, where he's buried. Up on the hill is our fortress of the 14th century. And we can see the nets here with the olives. And you see, this is the picking in November. Some are green, some are black. And it is fine because also when we pick, we're looking for our olives to ripen a bit, hopefully a bit darker, but there can be a nice mixture of the greens and blacks. When we pick two, some of the leaves go into the nets, they'll be dumped into a bucket, which later goes to the mill, and we'll see later how a machine there will separate the leaves from the olives. The Unto Festival starts in the City Hall of Assisi in the 14th century, Palazzo della Conciliazione, and there is a presentation for adults and school children about the history of the olive in mythology, in history, and a big discussion, an important discussion about the olive oil as very important to the economy today of Italy and Umbria in particular. Alain Ducasse, one of the greatest chefs in Europe, prefers the olive oils from the hills of Foligno, the Spello area, saying it's the greatest in the world. And here we can see that the Unto Festival's subtitle is Eventi a Macchie d'Olio. That's a wonderful title, actually, because this means events like a spot of oil. If you say a macchio d'olio, you're talking about an event or a happening which diffused. It went everywhere. It was very widespread. So events which are very widespread, it's a play on word with the expression like a drop of oil, because the drop of oil will diffuse, it will spread out. The events a macchia d'olio include cooking classes, also of medieval cuisine, but not just only, where of course the olive oil stars. And there'll be cooking classes for adults, for young people as well. There'll be events to historic villas, hikes around the area of Assisi to historic villas where one can enjoy a brunch and see the people in their olive grove harvesting olives, enjoy delicious food. Olive oil will star. These people are being served some soup. I think it was a chickpea soup that year with fresh olive oil on top, newly pressed olive oil, and of course some bruschetta. Another event includes a hike up to the olive groves near the smaller fortress of Assisi. I'll show that to you in a minute. Behind these people, you see the larger fortress in Assisi called La Rocca Maggiore, literally meaning the big rock, the defensive fortress of Assisi built in the mid-14th century. And there is La Rocca Maggiore in all its majesty, towering over the city of Assisi. This is the minor fortress. So this big one is called La Rocca by us, the rock. This one, La Rocca Minore, is called La Rocchiccicola. So basically we're saying the rock and the rockette. So these people that you saw in the photo previously right here are walking up this hill that we see now in front of us to those olive groves where they will be able to enjoy bruschetta. It's being toasted there on the grill, and olive oil right in the olive groves where people are also picking. And nearby people are picking, and there you can see the net laid down in the crate ready for the olives. There are events which take place in the fortress, La Rocca Maggiore. You can see it towering here over the city of Assisi. That church you see down on the right is the Basilica of St. Clare, where she was buried, 14th century. And the events in the Rocca Maggiore will have medieval themes because we are the city of Calendimaggio, the greatest medieval festival in Italy, celebrating the arrival of spring and May. And this festival was widely discussed in one of my former lectures. And you can see the young girls ready here to recite probably medieval theatrical piece with olive branches crowning their heads. And there'll be events through the streets at night during Unto on the medieval theme, singing, poetry recitations praising the olive. Some of you will remember this image right there in the background of the Virgin and Child. It was part of my discussion on Assisi street art when we talked about the street shrines. And this is an event of the Unto festival. You can see a woman in gold. She's a medieval dama or noble woman holding an olive branch. And these young women are participating in one of the theatrical presentations honoring the olive tree in front of the Basilica of San Francesco. These young women in the medieval dress of the peasant farmers are serving bruschetta with the new olive oil, olio nuovo. Many figures throughout the festival are in the medieval dress, including the young couple on the left. They're selling little carafes of medieval ceramics that were used for the holding of olive oil. The little drummers will dress up and parade through the streets in their costumes of the Calendimaggio festival. One of the main events of the Unto festival is the food tent. It is called a mostra mercato, which literally means show and sell. Mostra is mostrare, to show, as in our word demonstrate. It comes from that root. And mercato, a market. So it's a market where you can see and then buy if you wish. And in that tent, there'll be stands selling olive oil, and everybody wants you to taste what they're selling. This young woman has bruschetta there and olive oil. This is another stand. She's offering olive oil on bruschetta. This is actually my friend Craig, and we were there together some years ago, and he's saying, buonissimo quest'olio, excellent, this olive oil. And you can see he's tasting the new olive oil. Look at how non-limpid green that is. This is a murky green. It is a just pressed olive oil and for sale. This gentleman is offering this woman a taste of his cheese. It's a sheep's milk cheese. So he's selling cheeses with black truffle, pecorino sheep's milk cheese with pear. There's pecorino with walnuts, pecorino wrapped in, aged in straw on the right here. And this young man is slicing prosciutto to offer you a taste of prosciutto, and he'll probably offer you a taste of cheese as well. And here we're inside the tent, and you can see all the different booths of the people enjoying the Mostro Mercato. Absolutely not possible this year. We're sorry, but it just didn't happen, the COVID this year. One of the events of the COVID festival is the restaurants of Assisi. 5 or 6 or 7 maybe will participate. They offer meals at a fixed price with dishes that highlight the new olive oil. The Unto Festival includes visits to olive mills to see the pressing with all the explanations offered and tasting of the different varieties of olive oils. And here in this poster from the wonderful Museo dell'Olio in Torgiano, which I mentioned in my last lecture, the Museum of Olive Oil, you can see drawings of 3 varieties of olives. And we actually have these 3 varieties in our olive groves. One variety is the Moraiolo. In the middle is the Lecchino. And on the right is the Frantoio. So these olive oils to be tasted will certainly be those 3. And then another one, I'm not sure which one it was that year, because these 3 are olives very typically cultivated, these 3 varieties in our region of Umbria. And here they are. And the growers and those familiar with the olive tree, the harvesters, those who have olive groves can recognize the variety by the shape of the olive and actually the configuration of the leaves on the tree. So here they are: Lecchino, Frantoio, Moraiolo. And it said that Moraiolo is one of those most resistant to the pest. It is a Mosca olivaria, which struck olive trees, I think it was 2 years ago, when we didn't even pick, because so many of our olives had black spots indicative of this little devil who had burrowed into the olives. The Moraiolo is the most resistant of all of our olive varieties. There's our Moraiolo right on the tree. And you can see a branch of the Moraiolo here, our house there, down there in the background. Now, I remember picking olives back in 1976. It was the first year we picked olives. Pino and I came to the land in 1975. In 1976, well, it might have been 75, the same year we were here. We came in 75, so it was probably that first December. We talked to someone in Assisi who had groves and needed to hire people to pick, and we took on the job, and we rode to this grove 5 miles from our house every morning in December on Pino's old Giletta 150 motorcycle. And we picked in the olive grove. This is one of, I think he gave us that basket to use. Traditionally, in those days, I'm talking about the 70s, you wore a basket around your waist, held the branch, and just stripped the olives right down into the basket. Even if some of the leaves came along, it didn't matter. I took this photo a few years ago, and a very treasured willow basket we have here. It was probably made by the farmer who lived in this farmhouse until the 1960s. And I'm holding a branch in my left hand, you can see that, and I'll strip the olives right down into the basket. The basket is hanging off the front of me. It's around me, around my neck is this belt. And in my talk on the Museo del Vino in Torgiano, I mentioned not only their olive oil museum, but in my talk on the mystique of wine in Italy, we mentioned the wine museum. And in the display case, there is a beautiful willow basket of the type traditionally made by the farmers as they worked around their fire at night. They'd repair their tools, weave the baskets for the harvesting of grapes and the harvesting of, oh, excuse me, Julia, and the harvesting of, pardon Matt for that interference, and the harvesting of olives as well. This is a willow basket. There's some willow behind it, willow branches over here. This is a pruning tool, actually pruning for vineyards, but also for small branches on the olive trees. And here's a willow basket that we had for years under one of our olive trees. There's the house in the background. On the right is in front of our house a willow tree. And the farmer who lived in this house before we did, Povero Gianetto, because you always say poor if someone is deceased. So his name was Gianetto, but referring to him now that he's not with us, he's called Poor Gianetto. Povero Gianetto, I'm sure, made that basket weaving the willow branches while sitting around the fire at night. And here are some of the baskets used to pick the olives. Look at the photo on the left. You can see someone is holding the basket actually in their hands, which is not usual. Usually it's tied around your neck, and stripping the olives into the basket. And this woman on the right is picking up the ground olives. Every olive is precious. They're all picked up. Two basket makers. Every farmer is an artisan. And I am not kidding when I say that the art of creating the baskets is one of the artisanal tasks, which is treasured in Italy. I don't know now who's making baskets by hand. Some of the elderly people who live around us probably still do. Once they're gone, I don't know who will be carrying on this wonderful craft. And of course, dear Pasquale has to be mentioned here. Those of you who heard my lecture on the street food of Palermo met Pasquale then. He lived on the island of Ustica off of Palermo. We'd go there every summer. There was always dear Pasquale under the tree near the place where we stayed making his baskets. He made them almost up to his death at the age of 100. And now the baskets are made by his grandson and a nephew that you can see here on the left. And the baskets are for the olives, for the grapes, for the fruits, and so forth. And stripping down the olives into this basket on the left. And this woman is up a tree on the ladder, and she's stripping down the olives too. Baskets, we don't have many of anymore. And we're using now buckets, plastic buckets. But you still will pull the olive down right off the tree and into the bucket. And here you can see what our olives look like before they get to the mill. We'll have a good number of black olives, but probably still many green. It doesn't matter. The olive oil will simply be squisito anyway. Here's our dear farm friend Peppa helping us pick our olives one time years ago. And you can see Pino stripping down the branches here on the left. And this is our farm friend and neighbor, Pepe, who's now, I believe, 86. He still picks all of his olives alone. He has over 100 trees. Over the years, friends living in the area have come and helped us, like Frank and Britt. And here, Frank has a kind of proper bucket, but we're running out of buckets. So Britt is just using a pail we gave to her. And she very gamely said it's fine. And she used that for her olive picking. And nets now are laid under the trees. It's a sense about the late 1990s, they started using nets. In the early days, there weren't nets. And even if there had been these nylon nets, our farm neighbors never could have afforded them. They're sharecroppers, our farm neighbors, mezzadri. It's a tenant farmer, mezzadro. It comes from the word mezzo, half. Actually, they got 52% of the yield of the land, and the owner of the land got 48%. But the nets have been used since the late 90s. So you spread the nets out under the trees. These are some friends in the hills near Spello. This is a family here all together because these olives that they picked, Elisabetta, they picked last week, and you know they're family members because they're without masks. If they weren't all family members living in the same house, they would be wearing masks. The photos I've showed you prior were from past years, but this was just about 2 weeks ago. They're laying out the nets, and they had, I believe, over 150 trees in the hills above Spello. And here, their grove and the hills above Spello laying out the nets. And what they will do is use combs to comb the branches down. And you can see someone on this ladder up to the right combing them down. That's, I think, Elizabeth's daughter. Her son is at the bottom here, at the bottom of the ladder. And here is a hand combing the olives right off the branches. And there, this is Elizabeth's daughter. She's got a comb in her hand here. And here's two young women here combing the branches down. And I just took this photo 2 days ago. I was coming up the hill from St. Mary of the Angels, and there was a young man photographing. I did not have my mask. I had my mask on when I took this. Excuse me, I shouldn't say that. And he was also well over 2 meters away from me. I zoomed in on him. And it was curious to me to see how he was combing the tree. I'd never seen anyone using a rake. He was just using a rake. And his girlfriend was next to him and gathering up the olives on the ground. Up behind him here is the Basilica of St. Clair. So this is just in the valley below Assisi. When we pick now, we'll use one abbattitore we have, and this is powered with battery. You charge up the battery, and Keegan is holding our abbattitore, and he's shaking the olives out of the tree here. On the right, you can see this tool. I guess you'd call it I think the English translation is olive harvester, but we call it a battitore, which means a shaker downer, literally. Pino doesn't like using the battitore too much, and I managed to catch him with one photo some years ago. He prefers stripping down with a hand still. Sometimes as we're picking olives, Pino will see that there are branches that should be pruned. So he's up there while we're picking and he's doing some pruning. There's Keegan on the right, picking up the pruned branches to throw to our donkeys and goats who are delighted to have olive branches. There's the goats munching on the olive branches. For them, it's like eating chocolate. Here's crates of our olives. This is a couple years ago, ready to go to the mill. And you can see that there are some olives in the crates, but they'll be separated out at the mill by the machinery there. Now, this is an extraordinary tool here. I saw this used for the first time just about 2 weeks ago at the olive groves of the family near Bevagna called Trabazza Marinucci, who have, let's see, I think they have 3,000 olive trees. They have 10 hectares, which will be well over 20 acres of olive trees. And they have one of these machines, which is called a trunk shaker with reverted umbrella. The trunk shaker with inverted umbrella will go against the tree as this is going. It's driven by someone up in the cab, and it will shake the tree. It's going to hit that trunk, shake it. The umbrella under it will open up, and there you can see the umbrella opening up. They pick their 3,000 olive trees in a week, 1 month and a half, 5 workers. And Giulia Trabazza Marinucci told me that the olive trees, the 3,000, were picked by her grandfather and great-grandfather years ago, starting in November, finishing at the end of February. They now finish in 5 weeks, thanks to the trunk shaker with inverted umbrella. And I think we can play a video for you now, which will show this in operation. Let's see if we can get it going here. There it is. See how the olives are coming right off the tree. That's something. And here you can see, I think the young man on the left here is actually a Nigerian immigrant who helps them. So they've got 5 workers picking all these olives. They will end up producing, Julia's told me, about 3,000 liters of exquisite olive oil. And there's some of their olives, and there's some of their oil just pressed. And here you could see some of their olive oil, and on the left, a bottle of their olive oil. They call it Nostra, meaning ours. La Fonte, near Bevagna, a wonderful place also for ordering of olive oil. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, I'm happy to have you get in touch with them. Wonderful olive oil they have. Organic, absolutely. And they have superb wines, including the famous Sagrantino of Montefalco, because their whole estate, if you will, their rural estate is in the hills of Bevagna. And the Sagrantino grape can only be cultivated in 1,000 acres anywhere in the world. And that territory includes Bevagna, Montefalco, and Llano dell'Umbria. So you can see also a glass of Sagrantino there. Now, after the harvesting of the olives, the next step is taking your olives to the mill. And here's Pino is unloading our olives some years ago. He's unloading them from the truck. They're dumped into these huge crates outside of the olive mill. And here, this is both of us a couple years ago. These are all the olives we harvested a couple years ago. And behind us is the machine, which is used to lift them up and take them into the olive oil mill. And in the olive mill, they will be dumped. You can see the crate here. It's being dumped down to the chute. It'll go through the chute, and they will be pressed. They come out the chute, drop through the grating. The next step will be the separating of the olives from the leaves. Then out comes, after the crushing of the olives, separation from the pits. Out comes the olive oil, the green gold. And these are two friends. I've known Pietro for years with his wife. They were at the olive oil. This is very important. We are given booked appointments when our olive oil is pressed. We are at the mill to see our olives pressed, to see our olive oil come out of the spout, to fill the containers ourselves, because you must be very sure that it's your olive oil and it's mixed with no one else's. You don't even want it to mix with your neighbor's trees who have the same olives as you do. There's a tremendous amount of envidia or jealousy attached to your olive oil. So they're waiting for their olive oil to come out, see their names already stenciled on their steel containers to be sure it's their olive oil only for them. You're given an appointment. One year, I think our appointment was at 10:30 at night. That may be when it is, and that's when you're there. And some people have steel containers like this gentleman on the right. And some people come with plastic containers like this gentleman on the left. He's wearing his earphones. The man behind who's working there is wearing his earphones. Why? There's a tremendous racket from all the equipment in the olive mill. And this is a couple years ago. This is our green gold coming right out, and it's coming into one of the bottles. And Pino sees it coming out. It's going into our steel canister, and he can't wait to taste it. He judged it eccellente. Then he took the steel canisters and tin cans we bought at the mill, because we had more olive oil than we'd expected, to the scale to weigh them, because you're eager to see what's your yield in proportion of olives to olive oil. And then he's on his way to load them into our truck to get home. And what did we do on the way home? We stopped at Peppa's. We wanted her judgment of our new olive oil. So we didn't even have it on bruschetta. We didn't wait for her to toast that bread. She just dipped her bread right away into our new olive oil. She judged it eccellente. Excellent. Now, let me give you a couple recipes for the use of new olive oil if possible. And if it's not new olive oil, whatever olive oil you can get. I urge you to get always only extra virgin olive oil. That assures a low acidity, low amount of oleic acid. Acidity should be under 1%. Last year, Gradassi of Foligno won the award of best olive oil in the world. And I just want to see, I want to tell you exactly who this was judged by. The guide is called Flos Olei, and we'll write that later. I'll have Julia write it for you. And it is a guide to the world's best olive oils. It's an organization, and they observe olive and judge olive cultivation in 5 continents for a total of 53 countries. And last year in 2019, the organization, or the tenuta, that is the land holding called Viola of Foligno, was judged by them best olive oil in the world. So let me tell you, you can't go wrong with Umbrian olive oil. Now I'm just going to show you a couple simple recipes here. And I would invite you to go on my website, annsitaly.com, click on the recipes page. And there are endless amount of recipes, many extremely simple. And I can guarantee you, if it's an antipasto recipe or a pasta recipe or a meat recipe, it's going to star olive oil. So pinsimonio, we always make a pinsimonio with our new olive oil. So what you want to do is wash and cut up a good amount of fresh vegetables, generally carrot slices, fennel slices, some radishes, maybe cauliflower. Pour olive oil into a bowl and then add to it wine vinegar. Mix the olive oil and the wine vinegar rapidly with a fork. It'll become foamy, really. Add salt and pepper to taste. Bring it to the table. Give everybody a cup of olive oil and vinegar, and then just enjoy dipping the vegetables in the pinsimonio. Another recipe, very simple to make with olive oil, new olive oil if possible, if not new olive oil, extra virgin for certain, is a cauliflower pasta recipe taught me by Pino's mother. It's Sicilian. And these are the ingredients you need. Parmigiano on the left, or pecorino, even better, a sharp cheese. An onion, white onion, cauliflower, washed, pine nuts, raisins, tomato sauce, and excellent olive oil. How to make it? Easy. In the pan, put olive oil. Heat it very slightly. Add the diced onion. Please do not let it burn. In the meantime, you have a pot of water to the left. You've salted it. You're boiling the cauliflower, but just until it's slightly cooked. And then you're going to drain it because it is going to cook in the pasta sauce. Drain the cauliflower, add it to the onion in olive oil, pour in tomato sauce, simmer it, and when the pasta is cooked, you will have drained, the cauliflower when it's al dente, still a bit crunchy. In the same water in which you cook the cauliflower, cook the pasta. Drain the pasta. Put some of your tomato sauce in this pan and add the pasta to it, and then the rest of the sauce. What I didn't mention was into the tomato sauce, after it's cooked a bit, you've added the pine nuts and the raisins. Okay, and then you are going to put the sauce in the pasta, mix it, and then serve it. So we have a tomato sauce with cauliflower, pine nuts, and raisins. And you'll add Parmigiano to it or pecorino to it. Now, what I do when I cook the cauliflower is I cut away the leaves and save them, boil them slightly. Then I toss them in olive oil and diced garlic in a frying pan. And I'm going to make a tasty bruschetta. So I toast the bread. I toast it on our wood stove. Rub it with garlic like this after you've toasted it. Add pinches of salt, a little bit of salt. Drizzle olive oil. This is the simple bruschetta. Toasted bread, rubbed with garlic, A little bit of salt on it, because remember, there's no salt in the bread of Umbria. Papal salt tax of 1540 by Paul III takes the salt right out of our bread. And so we always add a little to our bruschetta, and you should too, even if you're using bread with salt, because it adds a little bit of a nice touch. Then drizzle the olive oil. That's the simple bruschetta. But what I do when I've had the making cauliflower pasta is I've cooked the leaves of the cauliflower, cut them very small, and as you can see, sauteed them on olive oil and a little bit of diced garlic, and then I will spoon this onto bruschetta, and I've made a nice bruschetta with cauliflower on top. You can make a delightful bruschetta like this with broccoli on top. You can make bruschetta with steamed spinach on top. But if I do that, I'll put the steamed spinach, then I'll put mozzarella on top, and I'll slide it into the oven till the mozzarella melts. You can do bruschetta with the cauliflower itself on top. Bruschetta can make a wonderful meal, and if you add something on top of the bruschetta, cheese, for example, you've turned it into a main course. If you toast bruschetta, add something to it and top it with cheese and then put it in the oven, that is no longer really a bruschetta, it's a crostino. Okay, let's see, I've lost my... Okay, now these recipes were shared with me by our daughter Julia. Thank you, Julia. She is appassionata of wild mushrooms. She and her companion Guglielmo are often going out for wild mushrooms. And Rick, my Zoom guru, very kindly set her recipes into images that we can show to you and you can read. So to do funghi sott'olio, which is mushrooms under oil, but Julia would like me to remind you that this same method can be used to put artichokes under oil. Green beans under oil, many vegetables under oil. We're going to do this with mushrooms. Choose some fresh, meaty mushrooms. That's an interesting word, that meaty there. Clean, wash, and dice to a medium-large size because they will shrink when cooking. Fill an adequate sized pot with half water and half wine vinegar and add rock salt to taste. Bring to a boil. When boiling, add the mushrooms and 3 to 4 cloves of garlic peeled. Boil for 5 minutes max. Remember that these instructions will be in the video, which is going to be posted on Monday, so you can watch it again, take photos of this, and remember how to do this recipe. Drain and lay the mushrooms on a clean cotton cloth to let dry and turn firm. Julia, what do you mean by turn firm?
Turn when I'm too soft.
Oh, turn when firm. Thank you. Don't let the mushrooms be too soft. In the meantime, boil in hot water your jars. Your jars must be disinfected because once you put the mushrooms in the jar, you will not boil them. You're going to pour, that should be P-O-U-R, some of last year's olive oil, not the new olive oil, as it's too spicy and too flavorful in the bottom of the jar. Gradually add the mushrooms, garlic cloves, parsley, and or hot red peppers. Fill the jar with olive oil and gently use your fingers to press the mushrooms and make sure any air is released. Cover well with oil before closing the jar. Note, you can use this recipe for practically anything from artichoke hearts to green beans. Adjust time of boil based on the consistency of the vegetable. Do not let your vegetables get mushy. They should be al dente. Have a nice little bite to them because they're going to improve with age in the olive oil. And we haven't yet picked our olives. There's our olive grove. We're going to have an abundant amount of olives this year. It's going to be an excellent harvest. Last year was so-so. 2 years ago, we couldn't pick it all because of the parasite, which struck so many olive trees due to climate too warm and too much rain. But this year, We have olives in abundance, as everyone does, but Julia Trabalza Marinucci at La Fonte has let me know, as have had other producers, they will have an abundance of olives, but less of a yield of oil because we've had too much rain. So it's produced many, many olives, but olives which are not as rich in the oil when they're pressed as in the past years. So we will soon be having our olive oil nuovo, our new olive oil. I look forward to having some of you visit soon. Come for lunch, come for dinner, and we'll taste that olive oil. Thank you for being with us. It's been my pleasure to present this, and I'm delighted that you all came, and I thank you extremely.